In the summer of 1982, a phone call changed everything. Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, known as God's banker, sat in his Vatican office staring at a newspaper headline that made his blood run cold. Banco Ambrosiano on brink of collapse, $1.3 billion missing. The bank's chairman, Roberto Calvi, had vanished from Milan 3 days earlier, leaving behind a financial crater that threatened to expose the Vatican's most guarded secrets. As Marcinkus reached for his telephone to make urgent calls to Swiss bank accounts, he had no idea that within weeks, Calvi's body would be discovered hanging beneath a London bridge, weighed down with bricks and Masonic symbols, a gruesome message that would send shockwaves through the highest corridors of Vatican power. But this wasn't just about one corrupt banker or even one failed institution. What was about to unravel was a financial web that had been spinning for over a millennium, a story of how the world's oldest religious institution had quietly built one of the most sophisticated and secretive financial empires in human history. To understand how God's bank became entangled with Swiss numbered accounts, mafia money, and mysterious deaths, we need to journey back through 1,000 years of papal ambition, where holy water mixed with cold cash, and salvation itself became the ultimate commodity. In the year 754, something extraordinary happened that would change the course of history forever. The Frankish king, Pepin the Short, handed over vast territories in central Italy to Pope Stephen II, creating what would become known as the Papal States. This wasn't just a religious gesture. It was the birth of the Vatican as a political and economic powerhouse. For over 1,000 years, these papal states stretched across central Italy, encompassing major cities like Rome, Bologna, and Ravenna. The Pope wasn't just a spiritual leader anymore. He was a king ruling over millions of subjects, collecting taxes, maintaining armies, and accumulating wealth on a scale that would make modern corporations jealous. The Vatican had become the ultimate combination of church and state, with all the financial power that came with it. But this territorial empire was just the beginning of a much larger financial strategy that would eventually span the globe. The real genius lay in a system that was about to revolutionize how the church made money. By the 8th century, the Vatican had discovered something that would become its financial backbone for centuries to come: Peter's pence. This wasn't just a simple donation system. It was the world's first international tax collection network, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Every Christian kingdom across Europe was expected to send annual payments to Rome. England alone was paying the equivalent of millions in today's money. The Anglo-Saxon kings collected what they called Romascot, a special tax that went directly to the Pope's treasury. France, Germany, Poland, and dozens of other kingdoms all paid their tribute to Rome. What made this system so powerful wasn't just the money, it was the loyalty it created. By making every Christian king a financial contributor to the Vatican, the Pope essentially turned every European ruler into a business partner. If you wanted to stay in the Church's good graces, you had to keep paying, and staying in the Church's good graces meant keeping your throne. This medieval subscription service was generating enormous wealth, but the Vatican was about to discover an even more profitable revenue stream that would make Peter's pence look like pocket change. Imagine you've committed a sin and you're terrified of spending eternity in punishment. Suddenly, a representative of the church approaches you with an offer that seems too good to be true. For the right price, you can buy a piece of paper that guarantees God will forgive your sins. Welcome to the medieval indulgences market, the Vatican's most controversial and profitable business venture. The church had essentially created a price list for salvation. Murder? That would cost you significantly more than stealing. Adultery had its own price bracket. The Vatican set up a sophisticated pricing system that would make modern dynamic pricing algorithms look primitive. They even offered payment plans for those who couldn't afford the full amount upfront. What started as a way to fund church construction projects quickly spiraled into something much bigger. Indulgence salesmen traveled across Europe like medieval sales representatives, carrying official papal documents and collecting payments that flowed directly back to Rome. The profits were astronomical. The construction of St. Peter's Basilica was largely funded through indulgence sales, turning spiritual anxiety into architectural magnificence. But the Vatican had no idea they were playing with fire. This aggressive monetization of salvation was about to trigger a revolution that would tear Christianity apart and cost the Church more money than they ever imagined. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther looked at the Church's indulgence sales operation and decided he'd seen enough. When he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Castle Church, he wasn't just challenging theology, he was declaring war on the Vatican's entire business model. Luther's message was simple but devastating: you can't buy your way into heaven. This wasn't just a religious statement, it was an economic earthquake that would reshape the financial landscape of Europe forever. Within decades, entire kingdoms were breaking away from Rome, taking their Peter's pence payments with them. England's Henry VIII didn't just leave the Catholic Church over his marriage issues. He seized all Catholic Church property in England, instantly transferring enormous wealth from the Vatican to the English crown. Germany, Switzerland, and Scandinavia followed suit. The Protestant Reformation wasn't just a religious movement, it was the largest wealth redistribution in European history, and the Vatican was on the losing side. By the end of the 16th century, the Church had lost nearly half of its European income stream. Millions of faithful Catholics had become Protestants, taking their donations and taxes with them. The Vatican's medieval money machine was broken, and they needed to find new ways to survive financially. But their troubles were far from over. A French military genius was about to deliver an even more devastating blow to Vatican finances. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power in France, he saw the Vatican as more than just a religious institution. He saw it as a financial and political rival that needed to be eliminated. In 1798, French forces marched into Rome, not just to conquer territory, but to seize one of Europe's largest treasure vaults. The French didn't just occupy the Papal States, they systematically looted the Vatican's wealth. Ancient artifacts, gold reserves, priceless manuscripts, and centuries of accumulated treasure were either shipped to Paris or sold to fund Napoleon's military campaigns. Pope Pius VI was taken prisoner and died in French captivity, and for a moment, it looked like the Catholic Church might cease to exist entirely. When the dust settled, the Vatican had lost almost everything. The Papal States were gone, the treasure vaults were empty, and the Church's political power had been shattered. The institution that had once been one of Europe's wealthiest powers was now struggling to pay for basic operations. But sometimes, complete financial ruin creates the perfect conditions for innovation. The Vatican was about to discover new ways to make money that would be far more sophisticated than anything they'd tried before. By the 1830s, the Vatican was in such desperate financial straits that Pope Gregory XVI made a decision that shocked the Catholic world. For the first time in church history, the Vatican would borrow money from Jewish bankers, specifically the Rothschild family. This partnership was controversial beyond imagination. Traditional Catholics were horrified that the Church would turn to what they called Christ killers for financial help. French poet Alfred de Vigny wrote that a Jew now reigns over the Pope and Christianity. He pays monarchs and buys nations. But the Vatican was out of options. James de Rothschild became the official papal banker, lending the Vatican 40 million euros in today's money. His brother Karl regularly traveled to Rome to consult directly with the Pope. This wasn't just a simple loan, it was the beginning of the Vatican's entry into modern international finance. The Rothschilds didn't just provide money, they provided financial expertise. Under their guidance, the Vatican began selling bonds to Catholic faithful around the world, essentially turning believers into investors in the Church's financial recovery. They started buying real estate across Rome, creating rental income streams that continue to this day. This unlikely alliance between the world's most prominent Catholic institution and its most famous Jewish banking dynasty worked. Within a few years, the Vatican had stabilized its finances and begun building the foundation for a modern financial empire. But as the Vatican entered the 20th century, they would need all of their newfound financial sophistication to navigate the most destructive period in human history. During World War I, Pope Benedict XV found himself in a unique position. While European nations were spending fortunes on warfare, the Vatican was secretly receiving financial support from multiple sides of the conflict. Germany was covertly funneling cash to the church through Swiss banks, labeling it as Peter's Pence donations. Austria was providing clandestine subsidies, and the German Foreign Ministry was sending money from a propaganda fund. This wasn't just about spiritual influence. It was about creating a financial safe haven in the middle of global chaos. While banks were failing and currencies were collapsing across Europe, the Vatican was accumulating wealth and gold reserves that would prove invaluable in the coming decades. The Church had learned a valuable lesson. In times of crisis, neutrality could be extremely profitable. By maintaining relationships with all sides, the Vatican could continue receiving donations and investments regardless of who won or lost the war. But the Vatican's real financial breakthrough came in 1929, when Mussolini's government signed the Lateran Pax. Italy agreed to pay the Holy See 750 million Italian lira in cash and 1 billion lira in government bonds, a payment that would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars today. Suddenly, the Vatican had more liquid capital than it had possessed in centuries. The Church now needed someone brilliant enough to manage this windfall, and they found exactly the right person in an unlikely candidate. Bernardino Nogara grew up in a middle-class farming family, but his brilliant financial mind would transform him into one of the most powerful men in the Vatican. When the Church hired him in 1929 to manage their newfound wealth from the Lateran Pax, they had no idea they were bringing aboard a financial genius who would revolutionize papal investing. Nogara's timing couldn't have been more challenging. Just months after he started managing Vatican finances, the 1929 stock market crash triggered the Great Depression. While banks were failing worldwide and investors were losing everything, Nogara saw opportunity where others saw disaster. His strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. First, he convinced the Pope to declare 1933 a holy year, dramatically increasing donations from faithful Catholics. Then, while stock and real estate prices were crashing, he went on a buying spree. He purchased properties in France, Britain, and Switzerland at rock-bottom prices. He bought government bonds from desperate nations at huge discounts. You see, Nogara created a network of holding companies to hide Vatican investments. The Church could now buy stocks in companies that other Catholics might find morally questionable, including weapons manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, without anyone knowing the Vatican was involved. By 1936, while much of the world was still struggling with economic depression, the Vatican's assets had not only recovered, but had grown exponentially. Nogara had turned the Church into a sophisticated international investment operation, but World War II was about to present even greater challenges and opportunities for Vatican finances. In 1942, as World War II raged across Europe, Nogara convinced the Vatican to take a step that would have profound consequences for decades to come. On June 27th, the Church established the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, the Vatican Bank. The bank was designed to be the perfect vehicle for moving money in complete secrecy. The Vatican Bank operated under rules that would make modern offshore banking look transparent. It didn't have to disclose financial statements. It didn't pay taxes. It wasn't required to show profits to anyone. Most remarkably, it had the unique ability to destroy its files every decade, ensuring that no permanent record of transactions would ever exist. During the final years of the war, as Nazi officials realized they were losing, they turned to the Vatican Bank to help move their stolen assets. It's estimated that around 200 million Swiss francs worth of gold, much of it stolen from Holocaust victims, was allegedly funneled through Vatican accounts and transferred to South America. The Church wasn't just moving money, they were helping Nazi war criminals escape justice. US intelligence concluded that the Vatican, as an institution, was actively helping high-ranking Nazis flee to South America through what became known as rat lines. This period established the Vatican Bank as the ultimate destination for anyone who needed to move money without questions being asked. But this reputation would eventually attract the wrong kind of business partners. In the late 1950s, the Vatican encountered a man who would become both their greatest asset and their most dangerous liability. Michel Sindona grew up in poverty, but possessed an extraordinary talent for financial manipulation. His specialty was helping wealthy people and organizations avoid taxes, including the mafia. Sindona's introduction to Vatican finances came through a simple request. Future Pope John XXIII wanted to build a retirement home called Casa Madonnina, but he needed to raise $2 million quickly and secretly. Sindona delivered the entire amount in a single day, demonstrating the kind of financial speed and discretion that would make him invaluable to the Church. What the Vatican didn't fully understand was that Sindona wasn't just a banker, he was actively managing profits from heroin sales for the Gambino crime family. His ability to move money quickly and quietly made him the perfect intermediary between legitimate institutions and criminal organizations. By the 1960s, Sindona was managing significant portions of Vatican investments, helping the Church avoid Italian banking regulations by creating satellite banks in countries with minimal oversight. The partnership was enormously profitable for both sides, but it was also incredibly dangerous. The Vatican had entered into business with organized crime, and they had no idea how catastrophic this relationship would eventually become. Roberto Calvi grew up in a banking family and learned early that moving money around could build fortunes without creating anything tangible. When Sindona introduced him to Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the head of the Vatican Bank, Calvi saw an opportunity that would make him one of Europe's most powerful financiers. Marcinkus was criticized for his lack of financial expertise, which made him the perfect partner for someone like Calvi. Together with Sindona, they created Cisalpine Overseas Bank in the Bahamas, essentially a money laundering operation disguised as legitimate international banking. Using tax-free Vatican money as backing, Calvi and Sindona went on an incredible buying spree. They purchased Italian financial companies, influential newspapers, and eventually, Sindona acquired Franklin National Bank, which was the 18th largest bank in America at the time. For a few years, everything seemed to work perfectly. The Vatican's money was generating enormous profits, Calvi was building a financial empire, and Sindona was becoming one of the most powerful Italian Americans in New York. The partnership between the Church, legitimate banking, and organized crime appeared unstoppable. But success built on deception and illegal activities has a way of collapsing spectacularly, and the Vatican was about to learn this lesson in the most public and embarrassing way possible. By the early 1970s, Sindona's empire began showing cracks. His risky foreign exchange trades at Franklin National Bank were generating massive losses. Italian authorities were investigating his connections to organized crime. The careful balance between legitimate banking and criminal money laundering was falling apart. In 1974, Franklin National Bank collapsed in what was then the largest bank failure in American history. Sindona's Italian investments also crumbled, and both US and Italian authorities were seeking his extradition and prosecution. The man who had helped the Vatican generate enormous profits was now a massive liability. Calvi saw opportunity in his partner's downfall. He systematically acquired Sindona's assets for pennies on the dollar, making himself the Vatican's primary financial partner. By the late 1970s, the Vatican Bank had loaned or invested $175 million in Calvi-backed offshore companies, an enormous sum that represented a significant portion of the Church's liquid assets. But Sindona wasn't going quietly. Desperate and facing imprisonment, he began threatening to expose the Vatican's money laundering operations unless Calvi provided financial support. Under duress, Calvi wire transferred $500,000 to Sindona's accounts, but it wasn't enough. When Calvi refused further payments, Sindona retaliated by revealing details about Calvi's secret Swiss bank accounts to journalists. The resulting publicity created massive legal and financial pressure that would ultimately destroy both men. By 1982, Roberto Calvi realized his financial schemes could no longer be sustained. Banco Ambrosiano was on the verge of collapse, threatening to expose decades of money laundering and illegal transactions involving the Vatican. On June 10th, he fled Italy for London, hoping to find safety or negotiate his way out of the crisis. He spent his final days in a tiny room at Chelsea Cloisters, a dreary guest house in South Kensington. On the night of June 17th, someone convinced him to leave his room for what he thought might be a meeting that could solve his problems. Instead, his body was found the next morning, hanging from scaffolding under Blackfriars Bridge, weighted down with bricks and stones. The official verdict was self-harm, but almost no one believed it. Calvi had been right-handed, yet the noose was tied in a way that suggested a left-handed person had made it. The bricks and stones in his pockets weren't randomly placed. They were arranged in a pattern that resembled Masonic symbolism. Most importantly, Calvi had been desperately trying to negotiate deals that would save his life, not end it. 3 groups had motives for silencing Calvi permanently. The Vatican wanted to prevent him from revealing decades of financial crimes involving the Church. Sindona, facing his own legal troubles, might have seen eliminating his former partner as a final chess move. But the most likely suspects were the mafia families whose money Calvi had been laundering and losing for years. His body hanging under Blackfriars Bridge sent a message that was understood throughout the criminal underworld. Stealing from organized crime has only one punishment. After Calvi's demise, Sindona fought desperately to avoid extradition to Italy, knowing it would likely be a death sentence. But on March 30th, 1985, Italian authorities successfully brought him back to face trial. His worst fears were about to be realized. Sindona had been the mafia's favorite banker when his golden touch was generating profits, but everything changed when his empire collapsed and he lost millions of their money. The Gambino family and other crime organizations rarely forgive such mistakes, and Sindona's knowledge of their financial operations made him too dangerous to leave alive. On March 20th, 1986, Michele Sindona was found dead in his Italian prison cell. The official cause was cyanide poisoning from a cup of coffee. Prison officials claimed it was self-inflicted, but the circumstances were highly suspicious. The mafia had a long history of eliminating witnesses behind bars, and cyanide-laced coffee was a signature method. Sindona's demise sent a clear message throughout the criminal underworld. Betrayal, whether real or perceived, would be punished with death. His knowledge of Vatican money laundering operations died with him, permanently sealing secrets that could have exposed decades of illegal transactions. With both Sindona and Calvi silenced forever, the Vatican's darkest financial secrets appeared to be safely buried. Archbishop Paul Marcinkus had been deeply involved in every aspect of the Vatican's relationship with Sindona and Calvi. His fingerprints were all over the money laundering operations, the offshore banking schemes, and the illegal transactions that had generated enormous profits for the Church. When Italian authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, it seemed like the Vatican's financial scandals would finally be fully exposed. But Marcinkus had one crucial advantage. He lived and worked in Vatican City, which is a sovereign state with its own laws and jurisdiction. The Church could simply refuse to hand him over to Italian authorities, and there was nothing Italy could do about it. The Vatican threw its full weight behind protecting Marcinkus, issuing statements expressing profound astonishment at Italy's arrest warrant. Church officials argued that as a Vatican employee, Marcinkus was immune from prosecution by foreign governments. It was a legal strategy that worked perfectly. Despite being implicated in massive financial fraud, money laundering, and connections to organized crime, Marcinkus never faced trial. He remained safely within Vatican walls until his retirement, when the whole scandal had largely blown over. The Church had successfully protected one of the key figures in its financial crimes, demonstrating that Vatican sovereignty could be used as a shield against criminal prosecution. But the Banco Ambrosiano scandal had damaged the Vatican's reputation so severely that major reforms would be necessary to restore public trust. In the 1990s, the Vatican Bank faced unprecedented scrutiny and scandal. The institution was struggling under the weight of corruption allegations and financial mismanagement that had made international headlines. With Marcinkus's retirement, the Church desperately needed someone who could restore credibility to their financial operations. They found their solution in Angelo Caloia, a respected banker known for his commitment to ethical finance. As CEO of Mediocredito Lombardo, a prominent merchant bank in Milan, Caloia had built a reputation for transparent and responsible banking practices. Most importantly, he was deeply involved in the Catholic financial community as a leading member of the Group for Culture, Ethics, and Finance. Caloia's appointment marked the end of clergy control over Vatican banking. For the first time, the Church was turning over management of its financial operations to professional bankers who weren't priests or bishops. It was a dramatic acknowledgement that the old system had failed catastrophically. During his tenure, Kaloya battled internal resistance while attempting to implement modern banking standards. He pushed for transparency, proper record-keeping, and compliance with international financial regulations. The results were mixed, but the Vatican Bank gradually began operating more like a legitimate financial institution and less like a money laundering operation. However, just as the Church seemed to be putting its financial scandals behind it, a different kind of crisis emerged that would dwarf all previous controversies. In 2002, the Boston Globe's investigative team published a series of reports that exposed a pattern of sexual abuse by priests in the Boston Archdiocese. More devastatingly, they revealed that church leaders had systematically covered up the incidents and protected the abusers. What started as a local Boston story quickly became a global scandal that would have profound financial consequences for the Catholic Church. The scandal didn't just damage the Church's moral authority. It triggered a financial crisis unlike anything the institution had experienced. Dioceses worldwide faced enormous legal settlements, with some reaching hundreds of millions of dollars. Several dioceses, including Portland, Oregon, were forced to declare bankruptcy to manage the overwhelming financial burden. The financial impact extended far beyond legal costs. Catholic faithful around the world lost trust in their church's leadership, leading to dramatic decreases in donations. The Peter's Pence collection, which supports Vatican activities, saw significant declines as believers questioned how their money was being used. Churches, schools, and other Catholic institutions were forced to sell properties to cover settlement costs. Clergy pension and retirement funds were raided to pay legal expenses. The scandal had created a financial emergency that threatened the Church's ability to function in many parts of the world. When Pope John Paul II passed away in 2005, his successor would inherit not just a spiritual crisis, but a financial catastrophe that required immediate attention.